If you grew up in the 1980s, then there's one particular high-octane rock vibes anthem that you'll instantly recognize, and that's M-M-M-M-M-A.S.K. Man, just saying those words out loud gives me goosebumps. This show was definitely one of the coolest concepts, though maybe not the most original. Back then, with secret agents wearing high-tech helmets and driving cars and semi-trucks that transformed out of the blue into heavily armored battle machines. Yeah, what a mashup, right? I still remember that bright red Chevrolet Camaro that suddenly popped out wings and soared into the sky. And boy, did we cheer as loud as possible when they took on the forces of Venom all over the globe. For everyone who didn't know about this gem, the fandom was strong with this one. People collected the toys, the VHS tapes, all the merchandise they could get their hands on. But then what happened? And this is the real question we're asking today, and it's a head scratcher. How did it actually end? We all grew up and moved on and never really found out how the whole thing concluded. Did the good guys win? Did Matt Tracker finally lock up Miles Mayhem for good? Or did the villains for once succeed and Venom finally conquered the world? Well, it's time to grab your flight helmets and buckle up, because today we're going over the journey and history of this franchise and finally answering the question of how the hell did M.A.S.K really end. So let's unmask the truth. The 80s toy war that created M.A.S.K. Okay, so guys, to understand how the series ended, we first have to understand how it started, because it's actually important to the whole journey. Unlike many of the franchises that began as comic books or novels, M.A.S.K had undergone a different route. A pretty brutal one, if you ask me. They started off in the same battlefield that was the 1980s toy wars. And I get the reason why the toy industry was a legit multi-billion-dollar industry and only had two giants dominating the scene. Of course, we know them, Hasbro's G.I. Joe, A Real American Hero, and Transformers. And kids were torn because, of course, most of them had to pick one because parents were in no way buying both. So what did the toy company Kenner do? They saw how lucrative and successful the toy scene was and decided to jump right in. Now, they were pretty familiar with the toy landscape because they had secured the Star Wars toy license in the late 70s. But now they were looking for something fresh. And what could be more fresh than mashing up heroic soldiers with transforming vehicles and ending the G.I. Joe versus Transformers debate once and for all by giving the kids both in one. Of course, they also had to add something to differentiate them at least a little, so they added high-tech elements. That's how M.A.S.K, short for Mobile Armored Strike Command, was born. Yeah guys, the K was there to make it look cooler. So, M.A.S.K was a team of heroes taking on the evil Venom, which stood for Vicious Evil Network of Mayhem. And holy shit, the toy line was insanely impressive. They looked like ordinary vehicles that suddenly changed and revealed hidden weapons and whatnot. Some even changed into whole new vehicles. And of course, each vehicle was piloted by one of the heroes, and they had their iconic removable masks. Now, what was really special about these masks is that they added an extra little edge, since the masks endowed each person with a unique power. And it makes sense, because that's literally the name of the org. Like, Matt Tracker, the leader of M.A.S.K, had a Spectrum mask, which gave him enhanced vision. And then Miles Mayhem, who was the evil mastermind of Venom, wore a Viper mask that basically sprayed corrosive acid. And it really had an impressive lineup of vehicles. Brad Turner, aka Chopper, operated a motorcycle that changed into a helicopter. Like, what the hell? Then there was Gator, which was an off-road vehicle that changed into a hydroplane. And of course, you already know Matt Tracker's red Chevrolet turned into a fighter jet. Just imagine playing with these insane toys. Dan Larson, the host of Secret Galaxy, said the toys were popular because they were so incredibly well designed and engineered. 40 years later, the toys are still marvels of engineering that inspire people to look deeper into their construction and appreciate the creator's work. And I couldn't agree more, honestly. It's safe to say that the whole toy beginning wasn't a bad idea at all. What was M.A.S.K actually about? Now, Kenner didn't just launch a toy line. They went the extra mile and launched a massive cartoon series partnered with an animation studio, DEI Enterprise. Of course to sell toys, but still. So let's talk a little about the premise of the show. It was actually really simple. You had Matt Tracker, who was a wealthy philanthropist who led a top-secret organization, aka M.A.S.K. And just as he was a philanthropist by day and a crime-fighting hero by night, so were the rest of the members. Let me tell you, it was one loaded roster with Hondo McLean, Brad Turner, Dusty Hayes, Bruce Sato, Alec Sector, Jacques Lafleur, Nevada Rushmore, Julio Lopez, Calhoun Burns, Buddy Hawks, Ace Riker, and Gloria Baker. But interestingly, all these guys had ordinary civilian professions. But when duty called, they all put on their special helmets and jumped into their decked-out vehicles. And the war on Venom was basically never-ending. And this rivalry wasn't just out of nowhere. You see, Miles Mayhem was originally Matt's business partner, and they used to work together before he stole a bunch of masks and defected. And that's when he created Venom, with his minions Cliff Dagger, Sly Rax, Vanessa Warfield, Bruno Shepard, Floyd Malloy, and Nash Gorey. They committed all sorts of crimes and caused chaos everywhere and tried to steal historical artifacts. They were basically a global international syndicate. But of course, M.A.S.K was always there to foil their plans and save the day. And every single episode followed this similar formula where Venom came up with some diabolical criminal plot, and then Matt Tracker would get an emergency call. Then there was the recruiting sequence, which I absolutely loved, as did many others. Matt would basically ask the M.A.S.K computer to scan and find the best suitable agents for the mission, and all their faces and profiles would appear on the screen. We'd find out about their civilian lives and watch as they suited up. It was so cool, you guys. You have to see it for yourself. Like in the first episode of the series called The Death Stone, which aired on September 30th, 1985, there was a highly radioactive meteorite crashing on Earth, and of course Miles Mayhem was on it straight away. He, along with Cliff Dagger and Sly Rax, used his helicopter Switchblade to steal the meteor by literally disguising it as a UFO. Imagine the local scientist being terrified as hell thinking he actually saw alien. And as Miles starts formulating his evil plan of probably selling the stone to the highest bidder, Matt gets the alert and recruits his members. We see Brad Turner leaving his rock band right in the middle of a live concert. Bruce Sato walks out of his toy design job. Alex Sector leaves a giant snake in the hands of a terrified customer. Hondo McLean just walks right out in the middle of a history class he's teaching. I guess it's a free period for the students. And Dusty Hayes lets his pizza dough fall right onto the floor as he rushes out the door. And all of them gather at their hidden base beneath the Boulder Hill gas station. They load into their iconic vehicles with Max Tracker entering Thunderhawk, his red sports car. Then you had Rhino, a semi-truck driven by Bruce Sato, and Condor, which was the motorcycle ridden by Brad Turner. And these were the real stars of the show. But even Venom had their share of vehicles. Both sides had their masks, which they would activate to gain special abilities. Of course, M.A.S.K would edge out Venom and recover the meteorite eventually. But most interestingly, every single episode ended with important public safety tips and life lessons. In this first episode, the safety tip was about looking both ways before going into the street to retrieve a ball. And this was actually a really nice addition. Sometimes they told kids to wear seatbelts, and sometimes they warned not to hitchhike with strangers. So overall, a pretty action-packed show with a unusually wholesome ending. The cartoon that was basically G.I. Joe meets Transformers. Now, there is something we've got to mention here, guys. Obviously, we already realized that M.A.S.K is a little hybrid of the two biggest juggernauts of that era. It's what would have happened if G.I. Joe and Transformers had a baby. And you can see the similarities clear as day. I mean, not to mention the whole concept of transforming vehicles, but Matt almost looked exactly like Duke, if you ask me. And is no one going to point out how Venom literally sounds like an offshoot of Cobra? I mean, come on. But nonetheless, what is interesting is that despite having all the right ingredients, pretty well-polished animation, having one of the best executed toy lines of the friggin' decade, and having an absolute banger of a theme song, it couldn't create quite the same impact as G.I. Joe or Transformers. It didn't have that permanent multi-generational effect with that immortal pop culture status that the other two achieved. And that's probably because of the fact that the premise was so similar to the two Hasbro giants. It forever existed in the shadows of those franchises and just couldn't keep up with Hasbro's resources back then. Just imagine the competition in the market back then. It was difficult to crack. So now M.A.S.K exists in the nostalgic pockets of those few people who had the pleasure of enjoying this show in the 80s. And hey, maybe that makes it an even more precious hidden gem. How did M.A.S.K really end? Okay, so that brings us to the real question. How did this adventure actually come to a close? And there's actually quite a bit of confusion regarding this, because a lot of syndicates aired the episodes in different orders. So some watched Cliffhanger as the final episode, while others watched For One Shining Moment. And though Cliffhanger is officially noted as the 10th episode of the second season, most of us informally considered For One Shining Moment as the finale, as that's what we'll be exploring today. But what's interesting is that the actual content of the final episode literally doesn't matter. So it makes no difference whether you watched Cliffhanger or Battle for Baja or One Shining Moment, because in the end, the result was the same. There was no ending. If you were expecting some cinematic finale where all the plot lines were beautifully wrapped up in a bow, then you must have been severely disappointed. No, Miles didn't end up in jail for the rest of his life, and there wasn't any final resolution of M.A.S.K or honestly anything that signified an ending. It was just a random Tuesday. What took many of us by surprise back then was the sudden shift in the format of the show. Initially in season 1, it was this whole classic G.I. Joe approach where Venom did something illegal and M.A.S.K was on their usual crime-fighting business. But then suddenly writers took a whole new direction in season 2, which was kind of confusing in the beginning, because the episodes started being heavily focused on professional auto racing. And like, I get the appeal with transforming vehicles and cool cars and whatnot, but it was still a pretty huge shift to get used to. So now with this new formula, the M.A.S.K team and the Venom team used to openly compete against each other on a racing track, with their transforming vehicles and their superpowered masks as they tried to win trophies and the Grand Prix. But of course, Venom also used these races to cover and pull off sneaky crimes on the side. And that's pretty much exactly the premise for that one shining moment that follows. The episode begins with Miles and his brother bickering regarding the future of Venom. His brother thinks they should go legitimate and become an organization that does good instead. And of course, he's met with scorn and contempt from Miles, but he warns him that if he refused to adapt, just like the dinosaurs, he too would go extinct. Next, we see Matt talking to Nevada Rushmore, discussing the new Venom that has apparently gone straight after spending thousands of dollars on a public relations campaign to show everyone it's rehabilitated. They've even raised millions in donations. Then the episode shifts to the racing fundraiser, where the Mayhem brothers enter the arena representing Venom. And you've got Matt Tracker representing M.A.S.K, and the two former partners turned rivals even share a sweet moment where Tracker truly believes they could both be on the same side again, and they shake hands. Fortunately, Tracker still has his suspicions, as does Nevada, and the race soon starts. They're both neck and neck, and Miles is surprisingly using all legal tricks to race ahead. Suddenly, Brad calls Clutch for help with his vehicle Razorback and leaves immediately. But he can't find Razorback and instead runs into a police officer who turns out to be a Venom member, Bruno Mad Dog Shepard. Turns out Wildcat, that is Clutch's vehicle, has been hacked and he crashes. Now, Brad appears at the fundraiser and has no idea where Clutch is. It tips off Nevada against Venom's shenanigans. Fortunately, Clutch uses his powers to break free, only to realize that he was bait to lure Nevada there as Venom were waiting for a surprise attack on both of them. Their goal was simple: to cut off Matt. They instantly inform him as the race between him and Miles heats up. Miles even tries to shoot missiles at Tracker, and as soon as he's joined by his Venom minions, they team up against Tracker. But suddenly he leaves the course. And that's when we realized that the whole race was just a distraction. His real plan was to steal the millions of dollars they had raised for fundraising, and they decided to use the sewer tunnels to escape. But Tracker and M.A.S.K managed to find Miles and ambush him from all sides. And as always, they saved the day and got all the money back as well. At the end, Tracker simply hyped up his team to continue racing against Venom, and that was it. And as always, they ended with a safety tip of leaving car windows slightly open if you have a dog in the car, or it'll overheat. If you watched Cliffhanger as the final episode, it had a pretty similar vibe, except it was Brad and Vanessa who were competing in a drag race while Venom steals military documents and some dangerous seeds. The only twist in this episode is that Vanessa, for a change, wins the race in the Venom team, and Brad congratulates her. Yeah, even the episode name sounds like it's gonna give you some sort of ending, but nope, it's just a pun about mountains and whatnot. So there you have it, guys. We got no closure and no grand ending. It's just the standard formulaic episode. And honestly, with all the confusion regarding the sequence of episodes, I don't think they ever planned a sequence in the first place. They just made a bunch of repetitive episodes that they could broadcast in any order. Was M.A.S.K canceled, or did it just end? Okay, so now the next obvious question is, why was the cartoon suddenly canceled? Or was it even canceled at all? Sounds mysterious, right? Well, when you start digging into historical records, you realize that there was no drama or controversy or scandalous cancellation or anything like that. And it makes even more sense when you see the episode numbers and a huge shift in numbers between the two seasons. The first season had a whole 65 episodes, which was massive. And then suddenly season 2 had the briefest run of only 10 episodes. And that basically means that by the late 1986, the animated series was rapidly winding down as a television vehicle. This was obviously because the show's core purpose was ultimately to sell the Kenner toys. And while the first wave of toys in 1985 was a massive success, eventually it became difficult to stand out. So they wanted to try something new and shifted the whole premise into a racing series. But it just did not sit right and backfired pretty heavily. Eventually, the decision was made to just stop the animation series after those 10 racing episodes were over. But while the cartoon died down, the franchise still had some life left in it as the toy line continued to soar, with new waves of action figures taking the market by storm, even long after the final episode of the cartoon. They released the Split Seconds wave, where vehicles could split into two completely separate units. They even rolled out a European exclusive Laser Command wave in the late 80s, which had actual working infrared laser technology built right into the toys. So the franchise lived on in the toy shelves. So what happened after the cartoon ended? So the good news is that even though the cartoon ended, we fans were blessed with more material in the form of comics, including DC Comics and UK Comics. And for all the gaming fans, they thought about you too, with video games by Gremlin Graphics. Basically, if you're looking to continue the nostalgic road trip, there's no dearth of options, guys. If you wanted to read the DC Comics, it's basically a 4-part M.A.S.K miniseries. And of course, the major advantage is that the comics don't have to strictly follow the whole repetitive patterns that the cartoons do, which meant that there was more scope to play around with the characters, explore the dynamics a little more, and just overall have some extra depth. Then for the UK Comics, published by IPC, and Fleetway. You should definitely explore it if you're looking for something to spend your summer reading on. It ran for much longer and had way more issues throughout the 80s. They had some really good story arcs and a fun few missions. Then there was the IDW revival back in 2016. You see, Hasbro had already acquired Kenner back in the 1990s, so it made sense when IDW was creating a crossover series with the Hasbro Classics, G.I. Joe and Transformers, that they decided to throw M.A.S.K into the mix. Now this was definitely short-lived, but it showed that M.A.S.K was clearly still considered a pretty valuable asset. And that brings us to the most recent appearance of M.A.S.K in the comics, and it's none other than Skybound's Energon Universe series with the G.I. Joe and Transformer. Here, Matt Tracker first appears in G.I. Joe Energon's Universe 2025 special. But the even better news is that Skybound announced and released a new M.A.S.K comic series by Dan Watters and Pi Par that would fully delve into their arc in the Energon landscape. And the first issues are out now, so you should absolutely check them out ASAP. Just imagine Miles Mayhem and Venom experimenting with Energon in their vehicles. It's gonna be so cool. And everyone behind the series is super excited. Dan Watters has said, "Illusion is the ultimate weapon, but also sometimes weapons are the ultimate weapon. M.A.S.K is a book about ordinary people taking it into their own hands to face down the awesome weaponry of the Energon universe, and a high-octane, non-stop thrill ride to boot. I couldn't be prouder to be bringing you this story alongside Pi this summer." Similarly, Pi Par said, "80s sports cars, jets, lasers, robots. M.A.S.K has everything that I love to read, watch, and draw. And my inner 12-year-old fought to the surface and made me scream loudly in the meeting when I was offered this gig. Never have I more bitterly regretted selling my beloved childhood toys. But the chance to rebuild all that stuff on the page has more than made up for it. And I can't wait to see where Dan takes us in the Energon universe." And it turns out, according to executive editor Ben Abernathy, they've been working on M.A.S.K in the shadows for a really long time, so they've definitely been cooking. There was also a live-action adaptation that was announced like 8 years ago, but it seems like that just got stuck in development hell, so it doesn't look like we're getting that yet. But hey, we still got a lot of content to explore. And that brings us to the end of the video, guys. While the ending of the cartoon wasn't what we wanted, it did leave a lot of space for reinvention, and we still gotta wait and watch which direction the new comic series takes the franchise. I'm pretty pumped. What about you? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to smash the like button, subscribe to our channel, and make sure to ring that bell icon so that when we put out new videos, you'll find them first. Be good, stay safe.